This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, true seekers and true crime junkies. Welcome back to another episode of Hit the Road, Jack, Finding the Zodiac. Today we have Nolan Del Campo with us again as we finish off the alphabet in our Y's and Z's today. Let's welcome Nolan on. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
I love the tie-dye.
Thank you. From Rosarito, Baja.
It's from where? Baja?
Rosarito, Baja, California.
Nice. You just went not too long ago, right?
Yeah, I got it when I was down there.
Nice.
September. Yeah.
Yeah, jealous. I'm trying to get myself off onto a vacation, but gosh, I just seem to be too busy to be able to pull away. Hopefully soon. All right, so there wasn't a lot of research this last week. I did have a couple people comment on YouTube, which I thought was rather interesting. One individual thought that it was bogus that Dennis had found the hood inside of the PA system and that he magically decided to open this PA system while it was being videoed by somebody. I thought that was kind of interesting that somebody would think that, yeah, Dennis would be smart enough not only to make a hood, that it would be the correct material that predated the murders, that he had no idea or concept really of what the police or FBI might have been hiding or keeping to themselves in regards to what that hood looked like. Yet he felt compelled to turn it over to the FBI, who still has it in their possession. But nothing short of a coincidence. And it really isn't a coincidence. Jack had been asking about that PA system on several occasions and had indicated if Dennis ever got rid of it, that he should return it to Jack. And so when he started to think about this PA system as he was going through Jack's stuff finally to get rid of a bunch of things, he just thought, I'm going to open it up, I guess, was kind of the concept. And when he opened it up, he saw that something was inside there that he didn't believe. Obviously, a piece of material doesn't belong on the inside of a radio receiver, right? So he closed it back up immediately and then got his friend to come over with a video camera and then proceeded to reopen that PA system, and out came that hood. So for people who think that, that was something that was set up or that, it was some, phenomenal coincidence that Dennis did this, I don't think Dennis was smart enough to put this together in a way that would have deceived law enforcement in any way. And people have to remember, when Dennis was turning over evidence, he has no idea of what they believe to be authentic or not. But I'm sure that they had a concept of what they were looking for. And if that didn't fit the bill, then the FBI would have told Dennis immediately that that's nothing like what the Zodiac wore. What would you think, Nolan?
Well, didn't they say that they couldn't confirm or deny that it was the actual Zodiac hood, but that the fibers in the garment were made prior to the murders, so it could be.
Correct.
At the same time, they won't give it back.
Yeah, they haven't given it back. And obviously, if they're keeping it as some piece of evidence, then they believe it to be conforming or fitting to what was explained by Brian Hartnell. They called it a juke, Juke fabric, and that juke fabric did in fact predate the murders. So that means that piece of material, and albeit you can see the folds in the material because it had sat in the machine for that long, indicates that it had been there for quite some time, right? I mean, and who knows, maybe Jack wasn't the person who donned the hood, but he was the one that was the possessor or the keeper of it and the author of the crimes. Like, there's a lot of different ways I think that this could go. As I've said in the past, I believe Jack is in fact a killer. Yes, he's admitted to that. I do believe that he is responsible for many of the crime sprees, but is there a chance that he's also an author in regards to some of them to kind of deter the police from figuring out who really is responsible for some of these crimes? Who knows? Anyways, let's get back into the PowerPoint presentation. I am looking at the letter Y. We started this off last week. One of the things I did failed to mention last week is that one of the nuances that Jack actually uses in his writing, which is this letter Y. So his capital letter Y's are always positioned like a lowercase y. So this particular red Y that I'm pointing out here is actually a capital Y. And you can see that because he extends the arm of it so far up into the sky as if to make it as tall as some of your upper extender letters. And so that, I guess, is one of the things when I come back to where he positioned Ys, such as the ones over here in the Dear Draft Board, which looks like a U sitting on top of a stem, is because Jack literally does not know how to form a capital Y. Or does not form, a capital Y in his own writing. And we talked about some of those other ones like Sorry Mary, where we see the stem and then it looks like the V shape of the Y is placed on top, kind of offset there. Kind of a little wonky looking, but you see that throughout many of them, including Anthrax. And for the most part, though, we see the lower Y formation in these letters. I want to say, you remember where we left off, Nolan?
Well, I thought we were almost finished with Ys.
I thought so too. I think we kind of made it down into, let's see here. Well, needless to say, we can go back and forth and see these U-shaped Ys, like the one over here in the Oakland County child murder. This one is extremely similar to what's going on in Sherry Jo Bates. This intention to kind of disguise. We saw her happen as early as the lipstick killer. And then we had these, what I referred to as this funky Y that we see down here in the scorpion letter, which has been consistent. And we've seen it with these small heads and long tails in many of the other Ys, such as the Fairfield letter right there, in the Dear Draft Board letter here. Back and forth, you can find it all over this display. Here's another one in the Zodiac Killer that is very similar to the scorpions. JonBenet Ramsey was nothing short of, again, similarities that were being found with the small heads of the Y and the long tails. Again, we get to see some of that funky form that is used with this Y here that is, again, consistent with the Ys up in the Dear Draft Board and the Zodiac. Voinovich, again, we had the same slant, we had the same style. Everything was kind of running in tandem with what we've been looking at, including this one over here, again, with a very small head and a very long tail. Anthrax only used capital Ys, but once again, like I said, those were the stem placement with the V shape of the Y head being placed on top of that stem. When I got into Tom Voigt's Ys, I actually found that they are extremely consistent with Jack's and extremely consistent with the rest of the writing that we've been looking at here. I have the slant bars, of course. You can go through here and find that the slants of these Ys are consistent with every single communication, not differing one from the next. Now, it's not so much of a huge identifier that the slant is the same. It's really kind of that it isn't different. So we're not seeing a run of Ys that hold a different slant on the plane. It's basically that every single time we look at Ys that look more fluidly written, we find that they have this hard right slant that we were talking about, like with that maniacal D a couple weeks ago.
The letter different to me are the Dear Draft Board, and of course the JonBenet Ramsey. They always look different. But the Anthrax and the Tim Miller look similar to each other.
Yes, exactly. So when you go back and forth between the communications, you can find that the disguise that was used in one communication is definitely the disguise that was used in another communication. I do trait and note this stem that comes off on John Benet Ramsey. We can see it actually curving to the right here at the bottom. So it has that hook as if it's moving off to the right. Definitely something that Jack did in his own writing. And it was definitely consistent with what we were seeing down here in the Tom Voigt letter Y's. We can see at the bottom here that hook that picks up at the bottom. So some of these minute nuances, but here's that U-shaped one again that we found up there in the lipstick killing case. And of course, I noted it wherever I found it all over these particular documents, but it did find it in the DC Freeway Phantom again. So while four out of the 5 Ys in the DC Freeway Phantom, you can tell that there are 2 strokes there. So he did the stem and then he did the arm. But in one of them, he actually did a single stroke Y, which is that U shape that we're talking about. And that is definitely consistent with the one we see down here in John Benet Ramsey. We see the little arms that have the curvature as it moves into the stem. That is definitely consistent right there with Jack's. Let's see here. Other than the actual, let's see, I also found a similarity in one of Tom Voigt's Ys here with another one in the presentation. Let me see if I can figure out where that one is. I hate going back and looking for it. I wish I had a much larger screen to put all of this on. Anywho, it's in there somewhere. And then, yes, the finale letter to Tim Miller. Again, I think that a lot of this was an attempt to be more copybook straight, which is why it's more consistent with the Anthrax letters as well. But anywhere you go up and you find some of those copybook Ys where he actually attempted to make it look strictly like a print or a text, we find that those Ys are constructed in that manner. All right, so I'm not sure where we left off last week, but you can go through. Anything circled in red means that it matches one of the other crime scenes. Anything in blue means that it actually matches Jack. And the famous letter Z. Oh boy. I did not obviously have a lot to work with on here, so it's going to be a short slide. We did find Z's in the Sherry Drobe Bates letter, in the Fairfield letters, the Zodiac Killer letters, the Channel 9 letter, the Herb Cain, Atlanta, Georgia, Sacramento Scorpion, John Benet Ramsey. I also found a Z in, though it's obviously a horrible image of it. In Anthrax, we had a Z, and then Tim Miller and Tom Voigt, we had Z's. So let's talk about those for a minute. The Z's that I mapped out for Jack, he has these rounded versions, but he also has the very angular versions. And one of the things that I noted for Jack was the small crossbar on top with the very long crossbar on the bottom, and then kind of an offset. I only saw it happen this one time where the actual top portion of the Z, the crossbar there, was a little bit longer than the bottom portion of it. And actually it happened in 2 of them there. So when I started cross comparing these, I was actually able to lay out some lines so that we can go straight to the ones that we were looking for. The Black Dahlia letter Z right here was consistent with the shape and formation of the Z here in the Zodiac. The let's see here, this particular Z and well, the size of the crossbar at the top and at the bottom are similar with the Z found here in the Zodiac's writing. The Channel 9 newsletter, again, also very consistent with that version of Jack's Z. This particular one in the Channel 9 newsletter, so this is the Citizen letter and this is the Channel 9 newsletter. So we had a match between Jack and the Channel 9, and in the Citizen letter we had more. Now the top is a little bit different with this curvature that's happening here, but I notated it for the bottom, and the way that bottom shape is actually coming to more of an angular point there on the left. While it still is rounded, it is consistent with what Jack was doing over here in these first few Z's. In the Zodiac realm, I actually found that this turned down bottom crossbar was consistent with what we were seeing in Tom Voigt's writing. And it actually happens a couple times here in the Zodiac's writing, though we also have this version again that I was saying that was more rounded, or was rounded, but with a little bit of an angularity. Again, very consistent with Jack's handwriting. We go back and forth. So this letter Z right here in the Fairfield, or in the Zodiac letters, is consistent with the Herb Cain, but we know that because Herb Cains were written by the Zodiac. We also had a consistency with the Herb Cain guest letter, and that letter Z was consistent with another letter Z found in the Zodiac's writing. I did find a consistency with the letter Z here in the Zodiac's writing to the finale letter from Tim Miller. This curvature, or this, it's actually bending in two different directions. It comes down and then back up again. So it has a wave basically to the bottom crossbar in one of the Zodiac Z's, which is definitely consistent with what we see going on in Tom Voigt's letter Z's. Let's see here. So a consistency between the guest letter as well with the Tim Miller as far as the size, the slit, and the shape. It almost reminded me that some of these Z's were kind of hunched backwards, like a snake getting ready to strike. Something I kind of just idealized an image in my mind, like Terry B does. Again, over here, we can see it in almost that shape of that number 2 look, as we were talking about before.
I think when Jack writes naturally, it's more like a number 2. But when he's trying to be proper, it's more like a regular Z, like a textbook Z. And I think with the Zodiacs, most of them are like textbook Zs. And I think that's on purpose.
Right. Well, and we can see here that number 2 structure that you were just mentioning, and we can see up here in Jack's again, that number 2 structure. So rounded at the top right-hand corner and angular at the bottom. Now, of course, the slant is different between these two, but we know that he was manipulating his slant in many of these letters. Some of these other shapes in the Fairfield letter, we can see the sharpness and angularity of those points are very consistent with Tom Voigt's as well. Let's see here. I should have marked the scorpion one right here because that is consistent with the Tim Miller. Here we've got that downturned crossbar again on the bottom, very consistent with what was going on in Tom Voigt's. Again, I'm not surprised because the letter to Tom Voight was taking credit for being the Zodiac. And while Tom Voight believes that it's not from the Zodiac, I find that there are far too many consistencies with the Zodiac's handwriting for it to not have been him. Again, this leads back to that evidence thing, Nolan. I'm going to go back with Nolan on screen here. When the Zodiac wrote to Tom Voight, can you bring up Nolan, please? Is he still there?
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Well,
I don't see you.
Anyway.
I don't see you anymore. When the Zodiac wrote Tom Voight, he submitted fingerprints and DNA. And he stated that this would identify him and that Tom Voight would know who he is. And so in a follow-up letter, he then tells Tom Voight, by now you know who I am because he sent him this stuff. There would be no benefit for anyone, I would think, to submit evidence that would exclude them, right? I mean, right. If you're trying to take credit for it.
Which is kind of odd, too, because if the FBI or some other law enforcement has any trace evidence of DNA and things like that, then there could be a match by him doing that. But he obviously figured that they did not have that evidence.
No, I think he did know that they had these letters were written in 2001 and 2003. So let me just give you that background. So well after the crimes, well after it had been established that there was DNA on the letters
like
that could
30
be
years
compared.
later.
Yeah. So if he had thought that they didn't have any, it would have been worthless to send it in, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, how are you going to out yourself and say, I am who I am? Here's the proof if they didn't have anything to match or compare it to. So, in
Okay.
my mind, I would think that the author believed that they had something that it could compare. And also in these letters, when we get to him, you'll see he's trying to talk Tom into adopting his story of
Okay.
the events to make a real movie, because I believe that they're in the makes of some type of a movie or maybe a documentary or something that's going on. And he's reaching out to Tom saying, I have the real story. You want my story? Here's my evidence to prove I am who I say I am. And then that follow-up letter comes in 2 years later saying, by now you know who I am. So why would would somebody presume that they had made that match? And then when you get into the Tim Miller letter in 2005, and he states that the secret killer is no longer secret. Basically, he's outed himself, but why the identification hasn't been made is key. So I do believe that he was attempting to let these people know who he was, what he was up to. And that kind of, in my mind, it kind of solidifies it. It's no different than Dennis turning over this hood. If Dennis had created this hood, fabricated the whole entire thing, let's say he was smart enough to go out and find juke fabric that existed before 1969 in order to make this hood, then to turn it over knowing that it was all completely fake and fraudulent, and that could be torn apart and blow his entire case that he has been working on for, at this point in 2008, when he turns over the hood, he's been working on this case for 8 years. Why would he do something that would jeopardize and blow his credibility out of the water? I just don't see that he would.
Okay. So,
right?
Yeah. So basically, to Tom Boyd, he was identifying himself as Zodiac, not as Jack
Yes.
Tarrance, but as
No.
Zodiac. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. He wanted to say he was Zodiac. I have the real story. We can make this a mega hit. There's some of the key words in this letter is that he can make the movie or whatever it is that Tom Voigt's involved with at this point in time a mega hit, like it should be, by telling the truth about what really happened in these events. So for Tom to negate it is almost as if to say that he has purposely and specifically done everything he can to omit the solving of this case, even when it comes to an individual handing out DNA and fingerprints and everything else.
Excuse me.
Now, I also noticed in the Tim Miller letter, we again had these, I call them tailgates. We have these tailgate tick marks that are at the top, coming down from the top of the crossbar on the Z and coming up from the bottom of the crossbar on the Z. And that was something that I noticed that Jack had done with several letters. We've seen it happen in an L. Oh, go back. We've seen it happen in the L. We've seen it happen in the C. And then even in the Elizabeth Short, we also saw it happen. And this was in, I want to say this said Los Angeles as well. But for whatever reason, he placed that crossbar up there that made it very, very much more like a square C than the letter L. But it still has that upkick or that tailgate that I was just talking about. And I found that in the Tim Miller letter. And of course, that was not a shock to me, since we know that's one of the manipulations that Jack does. And then I didn't really kind of cover, while I said it was a wonky appearance, we do see that this is also that number 2 style Z in the John Benet Ramsey letter. So again, when I was looking at some of Jack's and talking about that number 2 style, we see it in a few of these letter Z's where it's curved at the top like a number 2 and then has an extremely long tail on the bottom. And that's what was going on in the John Benet Ramsey. All right. Well, that makes it for the alphabet. We have finally completed it. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I don't see somebody going out of their way to write a lengthy 2-page letter to Tom Voight to include DNA and fingerprints, claiming to be the Zodiac, offering the true story, and then following up with another letter that states, by now you know who I am because of what I've already provided you. Again, that would seem futile. If he wasn't that individual and there wasn't any evidence to make that comparison to, then he wouldn't have, I don't think, asserted in that second letter that you know who I am based on the evidence, right?
Yes, correct.
So I'm going to leave it with that.
And
Is definitely of all of the letters that we matched in here, Tom Voight's seems to match Jack's and the Zodiac's the best because, again, it's more natural handwriting.
I think you should remind the listeners and viewers who Tom Voight is and what he does.
Tom Voight runs and manages the Zodiac Killer website. He in 1998, I want to say he copyrighted the website, and by 2005, as far as I can tell, 2003, 2005, he was given all the evidence, all of the images, all of the newsreels, everything, and all the information. Should anybody from the news or from movie making have any questions, he is the go-to guru of the Zodiac case, as they'd like to state. And of course, at that same time, a majority of the letters went missing, but he seems to have high resolution color copies of it. He seems to be in possession of evidence and items that should not be provided, I would assume, to the public if they were trying to keep things as close to the hip as they lead other people to believe when it comes to this case. But I find that he has promoted several different false suspects, and we have broken apart several of those suspects. When I first came onto the scene, he had Arthur Lee Allen listed as a suspect. Now it's Gaikowski. I was going to say, what is that name? Gaikowski, which appears to have been eliminated. They just don't fit the bill. But so it looks to me like he is making money off of many of these images by providing them in movies, documentaries, and other things, while maintaining the mystery that this is an unsolved murder, when in fact, I believe that he knows exactly who committed it. He was contacted by the individual, and that cross-reference in handwriting has been made to identify Jack Tarrance. So that brings us to punctuation, and I'm going to be bringing this up at the end of the presentation when I'm finished with all of the letters and communications, because there are several letters I realized that did not make it into this, but I wanted to brief you guys just a little bit on some of the nuances, the punctuation, and the things that were consistent between the communications outside of the actual alphabet itself. So I wanted to start with the and sign in Jack's writing, and I have then drawn directly over to where you can see matches in these particular styles and forms of the and sign, and they're very consistent with the Zodiac Killers. We see these funky little curved ones. Obviously, that's the disguise that was attempted being used, but then we start to see these more angular ones and free-flowing, definitely more naturally written and signs that are all extremely consistent with the form that Jack shows. Laying down a slant bar across the / in Jack's handwriting, we can see here, was consistent with other / that were found, and also consistent with the slant of many of these and signs as I went back and forth. And we can see here how close that slant line is to the slant of the Channel 9 News and John Benet Ramsey percentage signs that were placed in those letters. Now, let's see. We did find consistency between the D.B. Cooper letter and, which is here, which I also found that this one picks up. It's very light. You cannot see it, but there is a curvature here, and it works its way back up into that loop and exits itself out. So we can see that he does have a habit, at least, of moving to the right as he does it. So we have two different styles. We have one where they draw from top to bottom of the stem, and then they exit on the left-hand side of the stem as they move into the loop and then cross back to the right. Very consistent with Jack's writing. However, we did find in several of these, including let's see, the Zodiac right here, we can see that he drew the stem down, and then by virtue of the second line of ink right here, making that much thicker, that he actually exited to the right. before moving leftward into the loop and back into the right into the exit. So we can see that that is one of the attempted disguises, is to move to the right instead of to the left, as these more natural ones are done.
Yeah, pick 4 looks like a disguise. Yeah.
What's that?
Like 4 on the Zodiac, the one you were just examining.
Yeah.
Looks like a 4, and it's thicker. Yeah, it's attempted disguising.
Exactly. So to me, when I saw these ones that moved to the right rather than the left, I could not rule them out as something he hadn't done, because I can clearly see in some of these that that's exactly what he was doing. We had a plus sign for an and in Elizabeth Short, and we had just a very strict, but we can see that that is angular on the left-hand side as it moves up. And we saw that this particular and sign in the Elizabeth Short is definitely as well in Jack's handwriting right here at the top. So I found that the and signs were completely consistent. We see the and signs here in the Tim Miller, and it's almost as if Jack can't even form one. He tried really hard. Of course, this looks like the best one, but it's like the third one in the series of the letter. So try as you might, right? Eventually you'll get it. Between the Dear Draft Board and the OCCK, the Oakland County Child Murders, we found the use of the number 8 as an apostrophe in the typewritten letters. So in the Dear Draft Board, where he wrote don't and shouldn't, we see that in the Oakland County Child Murders, he did exactly the same thing, using the number 8 instead of the apostrophe.
That's eerie.
Right? 2 different typewritten messages. Yeah, and they're not that far apart, honestly. I mean, we're only talking 8 years there. And of course, in 68, come back. In 68, Jack is in California, and in 76, Jack is in Minnesota, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump, about 12 hours away from where the Oakland County child murders are occurring in Michigan.
So,
yeah. So like literally just proximity. Again, he just happens to be there. Sure, of course. Getting into the now, when I bring up the punctuation, you guys, you got to understand, not a lot of people use punctuation, and not a lot of people use it correctly. And so here I'm really talking about the use of punctuation and how many of these different authors, and I air quote that because I believe that they're likely the same author, uses the same amount and type of punctuation in their letters. Now, I did already cover in the letter I's back when we did that there was these period dots that are formed as circles, or we have heavy grinding dots, which has been seen in the Zodiac letters time and time again. Here's a colon that has the grinding dots and the circular pattern. So we know that that's within Jack's realm, and he's a heavy punctuation user, semicolons, colons, periods. And as we go through here, we get to see things like Lipstick Killer with the circle eye dots. We had the Zodiac with the circle eye dots. Also the semicolon, again, with circles, periods with circles. We have the semicolon, the heavy grinding dots, just like we talked about up there in Jack's. Sherry Joe Bates also used a colon. I mean, I was just blown away at how many of these communications actually use colons. Let's go through here. In Lipstick Killer, in one of the typewritten messages from Bill Hirons, there was a colon used. In the Sorry Mary letter, colon. Sherry Joe Bates, the Oswald in regards to the JFK. We had a semicolon used in Dear Draft Board twice. Zodiac used it. Let's see. The Voinovich letter also contained colon. The Exorcist letter from the Zodiac. We have
Herb Cain.
The Herb Cain. The Atlanta, Georgia Killer. Let's see here. So that's primarily just about all of them. There was a colon used, which I've handled cases where I do examination and identification of anonymous text communications, whether it be emails or social media. And colons have made identifications in cases because most people aren't using colons these days. And unless you're writing a book writer or something like that, most people don't even know what to do with a colon unless it's followed or used in regards. So like if they did the RE, they might use a colon, but they don't typically use it midline or after a name or in the places that we see are being used by the Zodiac Killer and many of these communications. I also found exclamation marks. You can see just all over the board for every single one of these letters. Once again, semicolons. We see this question mark was actually turned into a semicolon. And then we have semicolons with the Zodiac Killer, with, let's see, the Channel 9 newsletter, with, let's see, oh, Sherry Joe Bates up there. Also, the use of, let's see, nope, I think I covered it. So we've got and then I started seeing, and this is why I say I'm going to have to go back. In the Sherry Joe Bates typewritten letter, I found the beware with the ... And that stuck out to me after looking at some of the DB Coopers, which also carried the ... And then I found it again in this, this is a letter, and I want to say this one is in regards, it's called friction tape or something like that. It's about chess games. Anyways, I found the ... again, albeit there are 4 ... in these, but it is definitely something that is running in tandem with what we see going on. The slants again of all of the exclamation marks, we can see that they are all consistent with that rightward slant that we've been talking about. And even some of the semicolons have that same kind of slant to the right to them, where the top period dot is more to the right than the bottom one. So that was consistent with several of the Zodiacs as well. All right. Question marks. I'm going to, like I said, just getting started on these, but I wanted to show you how many I have already discovered used the same punctuation. We had question marks in Jack's, well, Jack, of course, but in Elizabeth Short, Sherry Joe Bates, the Zodiac Killer, which included the Citizen letter, the Scorpion letters, the Anthrax letter, the Voinovich letter, and the Tim Miller finale letter, along with the Dear Draft Board letter. And some of these, we can see the different slants that are taking place here. One of the things that I noticed is that when I ran the slant bar down the backside of this more angular question mark from Jack, I saw that it ran across the top of the period dot at the bottom. And that was consistent with the angular one I found in the Citizen writing. So when I placed that same slant bar at the same angle, because all I do is copy and paste it, it fell right across the top of the period dot as well. So again, just a relation to that period dot and the angularity and how far back that angularity reaches in order for that slant bar to map itself out that way on it. But I did find some that were leaning more forward as well, like in the finale letter to Tim Miller, and then one of the Zodiacs happened to have a far left lean. We also had quotes that were being used. So I pulled out quotes from Jack. Quotes and what I refer to as a long straight comma. And that it started out with the comma, and then I just started picking everything else up. But we did also see the $ being used. So we've got all of those in here for viewing. We have this comma in Lipstick Killer, which is obviously created backwards, again, an attempt to disguise, but it also happened to be rather large in comparison to the numbers that it was surrounding. But as we go through Elizabeth Short, again, we can see these long straights in the Sorry Mary, very consistent with what we have going on in Jack's handwriting. $ are being used both in Lipstick Killer and the Werewolf and DB Cooper. Let's see. Also in John Benet Ramsey, I had a lot of $ there. He even used one in Tom Voigt's writing. But as I go through again, we have these quotes, and these quotes should be actually facing towards the B. And Jack has this natural inclination to face them or have them face the opposite direction. So he's using the wrong side of the quotes in an opposite direction. And I actually found that happen in the Fairfield letters. Let's see, where else did I find? Maybe that was the only one. No. So these are two sets of quotes actually in Tom Voigt's letters right here. And we can see that the first one faces to the right towards the wording, and the ending ones actually face to the right away from the word as well. Do you
I
find that
noticed
odd?
The phrase pick off in the Atlanta, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't Zodiac use a similar phrase in the school bus letter where
Yes.
he would pick off the children one by one as they exit the school bus?
Yep, the pick off the kitties.
Yeah.
And in that actual letter, the Atlanta, Georgia letter, he's actually saying, "Don't you know who I am? I used to kill, I think women or something, because the Atlanta, Georgia is child murders." So
Yes.
not only is he using key phrases, but he is also stating that he is the Zodiac, and that's where he used to be and where he used to be killing, and now he's here doing that. And even then in the Atlanta, Georgia, I also found again these long straight commas. There's one small one that's curved, but the rest of them pretty much long and straight, just like Jack's. Atlanta, Georgia also used quotes. So as far as quotes are concerned, let's see, we found them in the Black Dahlia murder, in the Sherry Joe Bates, about time for what, we see that is quoted there. In the Zodiac Killer letters, the Exorcist letter, the Citizen letter, the Atlanta, Georgia murders, twice we see quotes. Let's see here, in Tom Voigt's letter. And then, of course, we had more commas that were being used. So again, even in Bruce Ivins, straight, long, straight commas. Very consistent with what the Zodiac had going on. I also notated that the Oakland County child murders up here with the heavy grinding dot at the top of the comma was also consistent with some of these other ones, especially by the Zodiac Killer, where we can see that he made that grinding circular dot at the top before he drugged the tail down. So that was the consistency there between that and the Oakland County child murders. Another thing that the author liked to do was use, and I pulled out Jack's here. Let's see, we're on 7:41. Okay, we got a few minutes. He liked to use parentheses. He liked to use hyphenation to break words and to actually break thoughts. So instead of using a semicolon or a comma or something, when he adds to a sentence, he actually just uses a hyphen instead. He also uses it in strange places, like at the end of times. So when I started to go through all of these letters, I found that the Bauerdorf letter, it contained several hyphens that were used in the typewritten matter. Hyphens were found in Elizabeth Short, in the Oswald letter, used right there with the semicolon after the Oswald case. This one is sort of a hyphen, but it's more of an arrow, I want to say, that points from Oswald back to Ruby, as if you should be looking to Ruby for the answers. Sherry Joe Bates used parentheses. Dear Draft Board letter used hyphenation and parentheses. Lipstick Killer used a hyphen. Zodiac Killer used all of the above. So we had parentheses, we had hyphens, we had broken words with hyphen. We had that hyphen that occurs around a date or a time sequence. Breaking of the word rampage, again with a hyphen. And Gall and Sharp, which is a typewritten letter that was left in New York. These were, I think, part of the former Manson family members, Gall and Sharp, and they were also, I think, members of Scientology. And they were trying to get away from all of that. But we saw the hyphen, so we basically broke one idea with a hyphen before we started another. Go ahead.
They were found dead in New York, Gall and Sharp.
They were found dead in Los Angeles, but they lived in New York, and the typewritten letter was found in New York in their apartment. So it is thought, and if you follow my reasoning for it, I believe that it was taking out all of the people it either involved in some way with the Tate murders, and the four Manson family members that were killed were kind of done in a procession, and it moved through Pennsylvania out to New York, and possibly were kidnapped or even killed in New York and then brought back and dumped in LA, or they were brought back to LA to face whatever it is they had to face and then killed and dumped. But we'll be looking at them in 1969 as well. DC Freeway Phantom, hyphenated as well. DB Cooper, hyphenated through several of the communications. We can see it here where he hyphens in the newspaper name, which is also consistent with the Albany, New York. So Albany, New York crimes were, again, taking it right back to that area. Again, making it look like it was a random serial killer, I believe. They used parentheses in the SLA letter, and in the citizen letter, we had plenty of hyphenation and parentheses once again. Red Phantom showed the use of parentheses and hyphenation, and that hyphen, that long hyphen that we saw back here. Ooh. Following, where did I see that?
Can you go back to the Phantom letter again, real quick? Yeah,
Right
just at first glance when I see it, it's like Zodiac. It's definitely Zodiac. Yeah,
absolutely. Yes, this one is the Count Marco letter, and of course, you see these long hyphens that come off of particular letters in there, and we continue to see that. So here in the Ghost Killer, the long hyphen is before the name instead of after the greeting. But as we go through here, you start to see even more. We've got more hyphenation usage through the Zodiac, more parentheses and hyphens used in the Channel 9. The OCCK, Oakland County Child Murder, hyphened. Again, two thoughts were hyphens. So he started one that ended in Roger and then has and picked up after placing the hyphen. The Atlanta, Georgia child killer used a hyphen again in the studio name and before the sign off as the Ghost Killer. We saw the splitting of words in Atlanta, Georgia as well. Hyphens in Sacramento, hyphens in Scorpion letter, hyphens in the John Benet Ramsey letter, parentheses in the Vowinovich letter, hyphenation in the zip code of the anthrax mailings are consistent with the hyphenation of the Tom Voigt zip codes that were being executed. And we saw that in a few of them, but we also saw the parentheses as well and the hyphens between words in the Tom Voigt letters too. So again, that boils back to the authors of all of these communications are using colons, hyphens, parentheses, quotes, all of the same type of punctuation as well. Another nuance that I found was the use of arrows. So Jack was an engineering guy. He worked for General Electric for the nuclear power plant out in the San Jose area. And when he did diagrams, he used arrows to dictate which direction wiring was going. We also see the use of arrows that are curved. And of course, when we got into some of these communications, the Elizabeth Short used arrows. A nuance between Elizabeth Short and the Fairfield letters is this 5 in Hill in Elizabeth Short and 5 in Mission in the Fairfield letter. So you use basically the same exact concept when describing a location. The Fairfield letters also had arrows. The Dear Draft Board letters had arrows. The Oswald and JFK letter, arrows. Grimes sisters, arrows. Let's see here. This is all Zodiac, obviously, using lots of arrows. He also referred to battery as BAT, which is exactly what Jack does, BAT. Zodiac also used the sun symbol as the power symbol for his device. That's what Jack uses in his diagrams for power in his device is suns. I also found the breaking using lines and underlining. So one of the things the Zodiac did when he broke one thought from the next is he would draw a line across the last thought and then begin his next statement or thought beneath that line. And that's definitely something we can see here that Jack was doing. Underlining, again, we can find a lot of that. I need to go back, like I said, look at all of these other letters, but we can see that it happened in DC Freeway Phantom was underlining Scorpion, DB Cooper, Voinovich. Definitely several of the Zodiac items were underlined. Dear Draft Board uses underlining and several underlining lines, just like we saw in Zodiac. And then last but not least, I actually had some references directly to Black Dahlia that have continued in communication. So in the Sherry Jo Bates, they said, the killer said, but I shall cut off her female parts and deposit them for the whole city to see. We know that wasn't done to Sherry Jo Bates. So his threat to do this, as if he had done it before, I believe points directly back to Black Dahlia. He also said in that letter to Sherry Jo Bates, I said it was about time. And we know time is a huge reference for the Zodiac Killer. The Gall and Sharp letter actually said time is short. I did not think that was a coincidence, Nolan, that he referenced time.
Elizabeth Short, yeah.
And Elizabeth Short. And then as DB Cooper, I found in more than one instance, the letters actually were swapped. So instead of saying DB Cooper, they said BD Cooper, as if in Black Dahlia.
DB, yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And DB is a made-up name. DB Cooper isn't a real name.
Correct. And then
yeah, so I was noticing that too. The BD, Black Dahlia, DB.
Yeah, it's a flip and play. And then, of course, reference to time being found, time and dates being found, both in Elizabeth Short and the Zodiac Killers. That's it, you guys. I'm sorry we ran over, but I'm glad we got this all out. Next week, we're going to start back with our first crime, which I believe is the Lake Berryessa murders. So thank you so much for being here, Nolan.
Okay, hope to be back next week.
Yeah, we'll see everybody next week. Take care.
Bye.